Welcome everybody to this talk by artist Dario Robleto. Dario has been an artist at large in the McCormick School of Engineering and Applied Science. I'm the dean of the school. My name is Julio Tino. And Dario has been involved with us since 2018. And this talk is under the umbrella of the Art Engineering Interface, which is a partnership with the Block Museum. People seem to be discovering that the art science interface is a good one. The last few months, there have been an editorial and articles in Science, Nature, and there was a longer one, maybe a couple of weeks ago, in Physics Today, with a title something along the lines of Mingling Art and Science Open Minds. People are making the first steps on this. Science ultimately is about discovery, that's the ultimate objective, and technology is about invention. It's not so easy to define what art is. Many people who are in the art world will come up with different things about what art is about. The perception out there, since people are taking baby steps in here, is that sometimes connecting with artists produces interesting ideas, but sometimes it's kind of a hobby for people in science. I think ultimately the most important thing is that we tend to equate art and science and technology with the products that they produce. But the most important thing, and I'm sure this will come across in the talk from Dario, is the process that is underlying the things that we do. Now, this will be based on previous talks from Dario, a really enlightening talk, and I would encourage everybody, there are already more than 200 people on the site, I see, to submit questions through chat at the bottom of your screen. With that being said, I'm delighted to introduce to you Dario Robleto. Dario, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a great introduction. Thank you, Julio. You know how much I'm enjoying this process, and the trust you've placed in me to interact with your department is one I don't take lightly, and I love doing these lectures with you. So thank you once again for hosting me. But to build off what you just said, I want to begin today with just a little reintroduction and recap of my time so far at Northwestern. And so just as a little context, as Julio said, I've been the artist at large in the engineering department for a few years now. And part of that commitment has been to have an artist engage with the engineering students for reasons that I hope will be obvious today. But I've given, as I said, given a lot of lectures. I've visited with well over a dozen scientists and researchers, but I've really spent the most time in the synthetic biology department, and they have been wonderful. They've embraced me with open arms, and it's so nice to feel that welcome across the divide. So I usually cater my talks to that audience and these younger scientists to really try to challenge them to start to think outside their domain and to try to make this case for why the arts and humanities, I think, can and really should play a part in their development as socially engaged scientists. And so I mention that only because I'm still going to kind of focus in on that, but because of the magic of Zoom, we have this broader audience today, which I'm thrilled about. And I hope the talk is enriching to everyone. So I want to just take a little time up front here and tell you a little bit about this program and my ideas about why we should value such cross-disciplinary work. So, let's see. So here's a big question. So what is this position? An artist at large at a major research university. And well, just structurally, what Julio and Lisa have designed for me is essentially a hall pass, an artist hall pass. I can't tell you what a dream come true that is, an incredible privilege to have. And basically, I get to roam the halls of Northwestern, and pretty much everyone has to answer the door when I knock on it. And I say that just kind of jokingly because generally my experience without such institutional support, I don't immediately get that door opened or a phone call returned. So what they're offering is just crucial to an artist like me. But I want to stress something here. This is a pretty strange and unusual thing that they're doing. And why in the world would a prestigious engineering department make space for contemporary artists in their halls and classrooms? And why would a busy faculty and students who have their own highly specific research goals, why would they take the time out of their day to let me ask them what don't seem like immediately obvious or relevant or even useful types of questions? And the way I like to think about it to all the artists out there, let's just reverse this idea. Just imagine if we had a synthetic biologist in residence at one of our best art schools or an art history department, walking around with their hall pass, pulling artists out of their studios, or lingering a little too long during office hours in the art history department. Think of how odd that sounds to us, and I like to ponder why. Why is that so weird that we should feel that way? And it might be interesting at first pass on that first day, but this program is designed to have a sustained engagement, and that is very different. So, and to make this even more unusual, what Julio has stressed to me, and I thank him so much for this, but he has said many times to not sort of worry about quote unquote making something, to furnish this completed product in any traditional sense of that term. In my case, like maybe a physical artwork. And instead, it's really been about the process of conversation, the critique, this just general poking and prodding around. And it's what I love about that is that it's an acknowledgement of something core to us, which is we're both artists and scientists. We're both deeply curious people. And this gives us a chance, I think, to just remember that and connect to that. So, there's a pretty radical position, I think, being expressed by this gesture and format. Art, the humanities, science and engineering, we're supposed to look at each other suspiciously from a distance, not quite sure how serious we should take each other, if we even sort of notice at all. And I think sure we can say some valuable things about how we are all, creative thinkers on some sort of spectrum of creativity. But I think more often than not, this prevents us from kind of moving past platitudes and into actual meaningful, and I would even say risky and uncomfortable types of collaborative work that can create new forms of knowledge. So for example, what if a scientist asked an artist to collaborate on an experiment design, or a sculptor led a physicist into their studio to make some crucial aesthetic or formal decision on the artwork? But at minimum, what if we just patiently and intently and purposefully listened to each other? And I want to talk about that point a little more in a minute, about how we can listen to each other. But my point really is that this type of engagement is a way more risky and difficult position to take in this type of long-term collaboration than, I think, sort of acknowledging some general sense of creativity that we all hold. So I want to just sort of quickly summarize some of the probing and questioning and some of that riskiness that I'm talking about that I've already been able to do at Northwestern with their incredible scientists and students. And the way I like to frame my work here is that I'm really drawn as an artist to certain scientific disciplines that one could argue that the idea that may have originated in science, but for various reasons, it just transcends its field of origin. And it trickles out into culture at large. And it's often unequipped to know what to do with that once it happens. I spent a lot of time researching the history of the artificial heart and heart-to-heart transplantation as a good example. And the seismic ripples this caused across culture, religiously, philosophically, even artistically. We're all, of course, familiar with the era of the atomic age and how that changed things once science learned how to split the atom. And so this is what I'm talking about as far as sort of rippling out from its core origin in science. And think of the moment we're in right now during COVID. To understand our moment as of now and when historians look back, it will really be impossible to understand it only as science. It's the interface between science and culture and politics and race and class and equity. And we all know the long list of things that we're going through right now. And so this is the type of topic I'm really drawn to because I see it as an opportunity for the arts and sciences to reconnect in some really important ways. And as I mentioned, I would really, I think arguably there's no better current day example of science extending past its original domain and moving into this complex cultural sphere than what's happening in synthetic biology right now. And for those of you maybe unfamiliar with it, in short, synthetic biology is this field of science that involves redesigning organisms by engineering them with these new abilities. And I'm sure the word CRISPR has come up for many of you and what that technology is about. And this is what I'm talking about with synthetic biology. CRISPR fully falls under that category. But I wanted to show you this slide here with this list of topics that I've personally been exploring as these tension points between synthetic biology and culture. And many of them are topics that I have and hope to continue to engage with the Northwestern students and scientists working on this. I love the science, I want to know the science, but I also want to know these ripple out effects. Because really the power of this field, are we going to cure all known genetic diseases and at the same time usher in the age of designer babies and super soldiers? There is a spectrum of possibilities, and I think we have to be ready to think about all of them. And so when I ponder these topics, certain questions arise to me. For example, what does it mean to do science that outpaces ethical deliberation and public understanding? In synthetic biology, they're literally inventing new ethical problems that no one even thought to ask before. And what does it mean if, partly through the breakdown between the arts, humanities, and sciences, that a whole generation of scientists are going to go uninformed and unequipped to think through the social and ethical dimensions of their work? And if we agree that is a problem, which I really firmly do, then the other question is, what are our sufficient pathways for the scientists to consult with ethicists and moral philosophers, and as I'm arguing, artists, and me too? Like, what is my pathway to them? And even beyond that, like just outside of academia, since this is a cultural issue, do scientists have adequate pathways to, the economically or racially marginalized groups, people with disabilities, patients' rights advocates, or even religious groups? And essentially, I ask that question because I want to draw on the full range of creative and moral imagination that we all possess as a culture. And I think this is one of those times we need to do so. And so with that in mind, I want to focus on one thing in particular that I'm really proud of so far that we've accomplished at Northwestern. And it was this completely organic and experience. And it really, as I said, it could only have happened with sustained conversation and sustained contact. So let's see this slide. So working with my colleagues here, I had this idea, could we hold this open and really honest discussion about ethics between artists, synthetic biologists, and bioethicists? And just as I'm arguing, there's something weird about this artist at large hall pass idea. There's something odd too about an artist moderating a panel about ethics between scientists. And I love how odd that is. And I want to embrace it because I think something valuable and interesting can come out of it. But as an artist, but also just as a citizen, I have deep love and appreciation of science. And one of the things that really concerns me is that there's this growing public divide and mistrust between scientific investigation, and I think sometimes it's perceived lack of ethical or moral oversight. This story from last year and the year before is a prime example. And when all the public sees are these types of headlines about science moving forward because it can, before it ever asked if it should, I think that damages a type of public dialogue that we really need to be having on these issues. So, but instead of only focusing on the ways that scientists can get this wrong, I wanted to focus on something a little different in our program, which is to think about what are they doing right now? What are the protocols in place now? And again, it was just through listening, these long conversations that I cherish with each of them, that I quickly learned that, each of these incredible minds, there are so many inventive and nimble ways that they do rise to the challenge of the ethical responsibility that their fields require. It's just, we never hear those stories. We only hear the headlines, the negative headlines. So in each case, my colleagues are all at various front lines of human knowledge. And as I'm saying, they're driven not only by their research goals, but because they are socially conscious humans who care about the broader social consequences of their work. And we had this incredible evening together talking about it. And we're gonna post this in the chat. And I hope if you're interested, you'll take the time to listen to all their incredible work. And lastly, I just want to say, I see this other ethically motivated reason for us to do this type of work, this type of cross-disciplinary work. And as I said, in this cultural era of a growing polarization and distrust between the public and I think science and the arts as well, I think there's something to be said for having an honest and public discussion across disciplines about ethics and the ways we can get better at this. Art and science really are, they're both these incredible modes of inquiry into the nature of life and experience. And because I feel that we have a responsibility to step outside of our comfort zones and communicate in clear and accessible ways, not only about our science, our individual topics, but to each other. It's not a given that an artist and a scientist can have a really rich, deep conversation unless we work at it a bit. And I think the same goes for the public. So I have learned that over the years that the argument for the collaborative value of art and science, it has to be restated, it has to be championed anew, and I think very importantly, it has to keep adapting with the times. Each historical era will ask their artists and scientists to, I think, rekindle their reasons and rewards for such collaborations. And each generation, I also really take this serious, is that we have to push back on our errors, tendencies to disregard each other, to stop presuming the weaknesses in each other's methods rather than our strengths, and to really challenge how can we possibly continue to justify this division between the humanities and sciences when we have such important cultural work to consider. And so I really want to challenge that idea. And what I want to always try to remind the scientists and students that I work with too is that these tensions that we encounter between each other, they're based on a history of misunderstanding that we don't have to constantly reenact. We can consider other ways to deal with that tension. And it's true that science has this long, steady march to distance itself from subjectivity and sentiment and emotions, as if it's sort of this contaminant to objective truth. And certainly, historically, going the other direction, the arts and humanities have also become very suspicious of science's insistence on a type of reductionism and measurement as the correct way to pursue knowledge in the world. And these historical suspicions, eventually helped, I think, shape the very sharp lines that we still hold between each other today. And I'm not dismissing them. They're incredible points to pull out between our differences and ponder what they are. But I want to sort of end this section by reminding you that the similarities between art and science are really significant. And the one that I always come back to after thinking about this for many years, and I have a long list, and I love adding to the list and challenging the list, but the one I always come back to is that at some core level, we're both interested in increasing the sensitivity of our observations. And the way a synthetic biologist or a physicist may do that, as opposed to a singer or a poet, is fascinating to think about. What do we mean by sensitivity? And I love the playfulness of that idea. But at its core, we both agree that if we can become more aware, more observant, more detailed, and really important to me, just more present with each other, and that with which we are observing, that this can lead to new types of discoveries and forms of truth. So, but where I think we often do end up misunderstanding each other is that I think sometimes we confuse measurement for meaning, and these are not synonyms. They're different things. And another way I like to say that is that there's a difference between what is and what matters. But my argument is that by pointing that distinction out, it does not mean a stark line needs to remain. We need both. We need emotions and art and humanities, just as we need the objectivity of scientific rigor to actually have a broader understanding of the true complexity of life and experience. So, as the last point I want to make here is essentially wrap up on this, is that we're not in competition. And at least I don't think of it that way. I think of us as complementing. We complement each other in really important ways, but we have to do the work to find out how and how to communicate it. And I want to argue, why this way of approaching these various fields as complementary is a skill that must constantly be updated and evolved. And for me, this, as I mentioned earlier, it starts with listening, just really, truly, deeply listening. And so with that thought in mind, I want to share with you a few projects of my past that I think demonstrate what I'm trying to get at with this point about listening. And so these are all specifically projects that were collaborations with various scientists, and which specifically grew out of the format of interviews and conversation. And again, through listening deeply. So, all the young scientists out there and all the young artists who are interested in this kind of work, I want to challenge you to think about how to do this collaborative work, and not just how, but why. And, I tried to give some quick reasons why, but as I said, it has to keep getting updated. The challenge will be on you to figure that out. But each of these next few projects I'm going to share with you are in some, I think, important sense, my own grappling with this problem, the gap between meaning and measurement, and the gap between what is and what matters, and a type of reconciliation between them. So the first project I want to share with you, and I've talked to some students about the motivations of this project, but I want to share part of it that I have yet to share with the scientists out there who've seen me talk before. And so, this again, like synthetic biology, what's a issue of our moment? Well, we don't need to be told. We're in an environmental crisis. And I had this idea that could we identify a new type of loss in the world? And specifically, I would argue that there's a new grouping of scientists. Their numbers are growing every day, a new type of category of scientists in the world who are watching the front line of a type of devastation and loss that is really hard to comprehend. And and what makes them so intriguing further to me is that they likely did not begin in their field with this idea that one day the thing that they had come to love and commit their life to, that one day their science would have to shift into monitoring its loss. And so to me, parallel with the science that they are accumulating, they're also accumulating a type of knowledge of loss and mourning. And in my own work, this is a topic that I spend a lot of time on, I think about, and I ask certain types of questions. For example, how do we mourn for something never mourned for? And that has led me into a rich historical investigation of the beautiful, complex ways humans have felt the need to express their loss, and specifically through various types of material culture. So I wondered, at the front line of this new devastation in the environment, in comparison to other devastations like the Civil War, as fully knowing that those moments produce creative responses to loss, I wanted to ponder what can we count as this sort of new invention of loss, or the creative response to it at the front line of this kind of devastation. And so Dan was wonderful in talking with me extensively about this. And I want to show you one of the projects that I made in response. I was one other slide here I have, because it'll be relevant to some of the work I'm about to show you. But just to give you a rich, quick, but I hope a rich view of the variety of forms that people have, as I said, have responded to loss in material and craft-oriented ways. For example, taking a locket of a loved one's hair and braiding it into hair flowers. But the one last thing I want to say about Dan and others watching these devastations is that they are doing science, but as I said, they're observers, they're watching. And Dan said something to me that I never would have thought of unless I had this rich conversation. He showed me this incredible graphic with the projection of the ice melting along the side of a mountain. But he showed me the wildlife and the vegetation that was quickly following that line of the loss of ice. And in no way was he suggesting, things are going to be okay. But what he was saying as an observer of this type of loss is how new things move in. And I found that fascinating. And I want to share this piece I did. And I'm going to switch gears and I'm going to wrap it back to this in a second. But it occurred to me that I wanted to understand deeply all types of scientists who are observing various types of front lines of life and death. And so I've become very fond of this category in gerontology, the scientists who study what are known as supercentenarians. And it's a growing classification of people, but a supercentenarian is defined by anyone over 110 years old. And this is an incredibly rare occurrence, as you can imagine. To date, there's only been 55 people who've ever crossed the 115 threshold, and only 3 have been confirmed to cross the 117 threshold. And so what I find fascinating about these people who observe this, and the Guinness Book of World Records is one of those people, is that they are observing a type of life, a life at its outer edge the how far the body can actually go, how far are we allowed to live. And something really beautiful has occurred, in a similar type of beauty to Dan and all the other environmental scientists observing this loss, that I found in this parallel with the supercentenarians, is that there's this unspoken, I would say, an ethical stance that there should never go one day that the oldest person in the world is not acknowledged. And to do that, it means constant monitoring, so that the very day the current record holder is to pass away, that later that day, Guinness and other researchers will pass on the baton, so to speak, to the next in line. And in this way, they're documenting this weird and beautiful outer boundary of life. And to me, it's, as I said, it's an ethics of observing, that we will watch, that we will acknowledge you were here, that you made it this far. And one of the ironies of making it to live this long is that nobody holds the record very long. And it's this very strange realm of relating to time. So I began this project where I wanted to know what was the artistic equivalent to this type of ethical observation. And I'll show you these two large sculptures here. First, I want to talk to you about the one on the right. And it's called "The Boundary of Life is Quietly Crossed." And so if you remember those slides with the examples of mourning customs, especially in the Victorian period, I adapted, I learned, I acquired materials in the original methods so that I could begin a type of mourning process for the oldest people in the world. And this piece that you're looking at is this case, this ever-growing case that I still to this day keep monitoring it. But each sequentially from left to right in the case are these death notices that I have rewritten for them, for all these people, these supercentenarians. And you may have caught in the earlier slide, but there were these things called, the Victorians had a thing called a death notice, these really beautiful, elaborate cards, not unlike what you're looking at. But I rewrote their story. And the thing that I focus on, though, about them are these very personal, intimate things that I think tell something beautiful about the knowledge they gained in life. And one of the number one questions they're asked every time is, how did you do it? How did you make it this far? And it's this so counterintuitive. What if you, and I've gathered up all that data. What have the last 50 oldest people said their secret to longevity is? And it's a list of chocolate and brandy and smoking and all these counterintuitive things that I found fascinating. But this piece was, as I said, a way to document artistically this passing of time. And the person that I want to point your attention to, though, my favorite of all, and who I also, she has the distinction of not just being the oldest person in the world at the time, but the oldest person to ever live. You remember I mentioned only 3 people have crossed 117? Only one person has crossed 120. However we want to define uniqueness and exploration of life and crossing boundaries, she should be there. We should be taking her very serious, that the life she lived was profound, the knowledge she gained. She didn't just live a life, we all want to live a long time and old, but she also experienced an incredible amount of loss. Think of all the aspects of life you get for 122 years. And so I think about her constantly. And I just wanted to point out that as of today, this is the record holder. She's incredible because she's also now moving into super rarefied territory at 118 years. And as I said, the very day that she does pass away after a rich and beautiful life, someone will notice, someone will be there to thank her and to acknowledge the next in line. And I love that. I love that humans do these things without any prompting. No one told those gerontologists to do this. It was a totally self-initiated project. And yet enough people are paying attention that we will never go a day without knowing. And I don't want to go a day without knowing. It's a type of meditation that I think is very important. The piece that was to the right of the piece I just showed you on the wall, I wanted to think about it a little more from Dan's point of view and more broadly environmentalist. And so this piece is called The Arc of Frailty. And whereas in the first piece, it is a series of death notices of the oldest people to ever live, I wanted to know if there was an opposite, in a sense, as these humans are passing one way in time, was there an example of life coming back? And instead of a death notice, could we think of something like a resurrection notice? And it turns out we can. One of the strange phenomenon of observing the front line of loss is that sometimes we get it wrong. And there is a classification of species known as the Lazarus species. And a Lazarus species is defined as a creature that at some given point was officially designated as extinct. You know, scientists agreed, we've lost something important in the world. And at some future date, it could be a year, 20, 50 years, by observing, a scientist or a citizen observes one more. And it produces this weird state where we have to officially pull them back off the extinction list. And I find that fascinating that, you know, it's not, their numbers are never such that they're going to fully come back, but they did come back even if momentarily. And I love that, like with the gerontologist, that someone acknowledges, okay, we saw you again, you're back. And until we can actually confirm you are gone, we won't make it an official designation. So this piece is a similar case. Each of these cards is what I call a resurrection notice of a life that came back. And for example, the Spix Macaw, and instead of their birth and death dates, like in the oldest people, I have their lost and found dates. And I just want to remember, I want to know somebody's watching, and maybe we can't hold on to them forever, but we're not going to say goodbye just yet. And in you know, running in parallel to that observation and the power of acknowledging that something was here and lived a life, there's this other part that I just want to end with this little section by showing you the other things humans can do to fight off this sort of final pass into oblivion. And the Spix Macaw, these incredible images of the Spix Macaw, you know, 20 years now after the species was officially declared extinct, we have just released 52 of them back into their native habitat. And synthetic biology is going to play a part, just to sort of wrap it up together, in these types of efforts potentially. And so what will that mean? What are the ethics, though, of observing and taking the next step of bringing back? And that's something that I think about quite a bit. So with that in mind, and another just great photo of life, this life at the edge, life coming back, flying back into life, rather than leaving it. And I want to tie that project to another ongoing project that I'm working on. And I'm very succinctly going to sum up this backstory. I hope if you're interested, you will look this up. It is a beautiful, wonderful story. Everyone who's heard me talk about it, I know doesn't want to hear me talk about it again. And that's why I'm just going to take a few minutes. But the Golden Record is an incredible archive of our planet. It was literally a record made of gold that was attached to a very famous mission in the late 70s called the Voyager missions that NASA launched to explore the outer planets of the solar system. And it's done incredible science. But the thing I want to draw your attention to is that what's kind of lost or rekindled sometimes in the public's imagination is that literally bolted to the side of it is this record made of gold. And the objective of this record was as potentially a final document of our planet, that just in case something ever found this probe, since it was going to exit the solar system, just in case maybe somebody or something more precisely, could play it back and learn something about us. And on board are incredible things. There are images, there are sounds of the natural world, an incredible selection of music. But the project that I want to bring your attention to, and relates back to my point about listening, like really listening, is one of the team members who put the record together, this young writer named Andrian. She fell in love with Carl Sagan, he with her, while they were working on this, potentially final document of our planet. And they secretly fell in love and got engaged while they were working on it. And Anne had this brilliant idea. She wondered, could a future technology somehow play back the electrical signatures of her heart and mind and learn something, not just about physiology, about the human body, but learn something about life, the lived life she was experiencing. And so she put this on board. It's not as well known, but I'm on a mission to get everybody to remember. And it is a beautiful recording. And that has led into an incredible friendship and collaboration with Anne. What I always like to argue is that, our representative of all the humans that have ever lived, our representative, potentially, the last representative of what human love was at the level of physiology and the electricity of their body, is still alive on the planet right now. She's a vibrant, incredible woman. I feel lucky to even know her, let alone call her my friend. And I hope some of you saw the last few seasons of Cosmo. She still writes and directs for it. But I have been in long conversation with her, and for a reason, because I want to tell you about this last project here. Because I want to take her at her word, and I have, which is, there's a weird idea here. Can we play back the electricity of our hearts and minds and pull something like experience out of it? That is a complicated idea that in 1977, nobody in their right mind would have said yes to. But I wanted to find out, fast forward over 40 years, where are we now with this science, this premise of the EEG in particular, holding enough content that we could sort of play it back and get something like the specificity of an individual out of it. And so I've begun this project with my colleague here, Pepe Contreras Vidal. And in this, my point about listening, I'll never forget the day when I interviewed him. I told him the story about Anne. I asked him, in his professional opinion, who's working at the front line of deciphering EEGs for the purpose of designing better prosthetics for paraplegics or amputees to be able to walk again just by thinking about it. He is in the business of doing something like Anne is suggesting, which is, can we decipher the intention of electrical signals? And he told me this beautiful thing when we were talking, which led up to this whole project. He told me, I asked him, what is your ultimate success here one day? Yes, to help people walk. But he said something I'll never forget. He told me that if you were alone in a dark room and somebody came up to you and simply moved their finger across your wrist, would you know and be able to distinguish between a lover, a parent, or a friend, or a stranger? Now just think of the subtleties in the dark of knowing those four classifications through touch. And the thing is that I told him, yeah, I think I could. And there's a reason why, because we're incredibly well designed to do such things. But I wanted to, sorry, I'm gonna turn that off because I forgot the sound was on. That was an example of some of the technology he's working on of people thinking about walking while the prosthetics are doing it for him through interpreting of the signal. But I want to dig in deeply on this problem and see if through art and engineering, in this case, brain-computer interface, if there's a way to push forward in the short term with his goals, which is better prosthetics, and eventually the expression of identity through those prosthetics at the level of a touch in the dark. Is there a way to, through a collaboration with the humanities and an artist, a way to ask new types of questions to enable that, both in the short term for his goals. But as I'm arguing, I want to know the biggest picture of all, which is Anne's problem, which is, can something like a full life be decoded from the signal? And so we've begun a project that's been going for a few years now, where a blossoming field known as neuroaesthetics, which I have to tell you, I have very conflicted feelings about as an artist who, just went on to you about the difference between meaning and measurement. But it is a blossoming field, and I think there's something there. And I want to participate and think through experiment design and also offer my own work as a source of the experiment. And so we began an experiment where, as he told me, it's very hard to get a lot of freely behaving individuals, wearing the device in the context of whatever they're studying. And there have been, for that reason, there have been very few major studies about freely behaving individuals in the context of art, looking at art. That's very different than the slide I just showed you of, a keyboardist in an fMRI. And there's something about the freely behaving part that we're all fascinated in. And so he used my show as the site of an experiment to record. It was at this, I think still to this day, the largest. We had over 500 people participate in the experiment. And a lot of it was to see how to do it all. But this is another aspect that I hope to contribute as an artist is, can we produce useful scientific data, write papers together that are merging our desires, merging the short-term desire of the scientist with these sort of more poetic, big scale ideas about, can brainwaves be read by alien species? And that's led into a number of, to date, we've held 3 conferences together. I've recruited and collaborated with many artists to actually do a number of experiments. I'm going to show you the one, and then I'll wrap up here. But many of you, and so one of my ideas was, could we use the rich lineage of something like the artistic version of neuroaesthetics? And I would argue the exquisite corpse sort of falls into this category. If everyone's not aware of it, it was this game the surrealists invented in the turn of the last century, where it was a way to sort of get deeper into one's mind, and each artist would be given a section of a paper to draw the head, the torso, and the legs without seeing the previous person's drawing. And then when it unfolded, it would produce these very odd images. But to me, what I talked to Pepe about is that, had he ever considered looking at the lineage of artists' games and artists' actions and the other ways artists have explored the psyche as types of possible experiment designs to build off of or to just use whole-handedly? And so we have been working on that. Here's an example of a cross-medium exquisite corpse of a saxophonist, a dancer, and me, the artist, the visual artist. And as I said, I don't know if this is actually interesting or going to move forward on the science in the short term or the long term with Anne's story, but I want to try, and I'm fine with it being weird, and I think that's what's exciting about it, is that it's a little weird and it's sort of rough around the edges in the way the arts and sciences have to figure out how to talk to each other. And so I'm going to wrap up there, and I hope we have some great questions. I'm happy to talk about any of these projects in more detail, but I hope what I can leave you with is that this is important, relevant work that, as much as I love the weirdness as I just described, I also want it to matter in the world. And if contributing, if collaboration with an artist can improve prosthetic design and the sense of touch for an amputee, sign me up. I want to be part of that. And if working with an artist can answer some weird, philosophical question about, are we in our signal and is it playable at a future date, as Anne is asking, then I want to tackle that too. So, Leo, I'm going to hand it off to you, and I'll end there.
Thank you, Dario.
You're welcome.
So I guess public intellectuals do not loom large now in our lives. Maybe in parts of France. But to what extent you think that artists could be positioned to steer public and institutional conversations, especially around the ethical concerns connected with science and technology?
Well, there are two ways to think about this, I think. So, part of what I think makes our collaboration so successful is we're open to even asking that. And what was so fun about the program, we did at Northwestern is I realized it's a lot to ask a scientist to sort of let the artist take charge on what could be a very touchy and controversial point within their own field. Like, are they being ethically thorough enough? Mm-hmm. And I get that, and I do not take that lightly. Which is why I feel, so my answer is yes, it can happen, but you've got to want to do it. And I would argue to all the artists out there who are curious to do such work, what are the skill sets the artist would need to handle such a project? Nobody trained me. I didn't go to class for, interfacing with a scientist about ethics. This is not a thing that exists in the world unless you figure it out. But I'm arguing that maybe we should have that class, and maybe it should be taught by a scientist and an artist. And because of the urgency of the time, we need to talk about these things. And I hope I conveyed to the audience, what you and Lisa are doing is a model for how to do that work. And I respect it so deeply because it's an acknowledgement of these ripple out effects of the science. Mm-hmm. And the interface between culture and science should be under the walls of the engineering department as much as it should be under the walls of the humanities department. Mm. So my answer is yes, but with training, I guess. And I don't know, how we build that part.
Yeah. So there is a question here that says creation in art and science both involve feedback. You give a talk in science, you get through with the talk, and then there are a few questions at the end. But it's not at the same level of presenting and defending your work in Cal Arts or in any architecture program. You put what you have done on a table there, and the presentation takes 10 minutes and the questions maybe 20. So in what way you think that something of what's going on with criticism that is so common in the arts could bleed into science? Or have you had any experience on that side that will allow you to make some general statements about this?
I don't quite understand. Tell me a little more.
So in the amount of time that you take presenting your work in science, for example, in APS, the presentation is, 8 minutes, 3 minutes for question. Whereas if you are in a class in architecture or in any program in design, the amount of questions is probably longer than you defend your thing extensively in there. So could there be some benefit in kind of bringing more of the criticism that makes something really good in art, bringing it more into science?
Yes, that's a great question. And vice versa, I would say. Like in art school, like you said, criticism's just part of the degree you get. You get critiqued. Science has its own way of critiquing itself. But just as, the kind of connecting the weird parts of, can an artist collaborate with a scientist at the level of experiment design? I think we'd have a similar, square peg in a round hole sort of thing that we'd have to sort of sand down and figure out. Because something I value, so my answer is yes, it can happen, but that's what's so exciting about the question is I don't really know what that looks like yet. I mean, I kind of know for myself because I've done it enough with scientists, and like they know what I'm particularly interested in or challenging them on. But I like the extra point of it being useful to both sides, not only as an exercise of sort of back patting to each other. That's what's weird and exciting about the question is that on paper, I don't immediately know how I can help synthetic biology propel forward on the terms of the laboratory, the science in the lab. I don't exactly know. I'd love to figure that out. But where I do feel I can help now is that other interface when it trickles outside of the lab. And that I feel the humanities are right now, today, well equipped to start the conversation. And so it's not if they're equipped at that level, it's who's gonna do it? Who's gonna take the first move? Who's gonna allow for sustained conversation like you're doing at Northwestern? And so that, if that's why I hope other professors perhaps watching, how do they invite an artist in, or, anyway, my point is that the model you and Lisa are creating here, I think is a way to start to answer those questions. But I do think it's possible, and they're kind of two layers: immediate cultural interface, and then this other weird question about, but can the science improve because of talking to an artist, and can the art improve because of talking to a scientist? Yeah.
So Dario, I think we would have an optimization problem in here in squeezing the maximum number of questions and the depth of your answers. But I want to ask you one that many people probably have, and I think this will consume the next 2 minutes that we have. Okay. And someone here wanted to know what are the origins of your own interest in the kinds of things that you do now, the making, researching an idea, and creating.
Well,
two minutes to answer that one.
Well, I'll say that science is a huge part of my life. I began as a biology major, switched to art, and I did that largely because I became a bit disillusioned with the methods of, or the way science was being taught. And I felt that being an artist allowed for a type of flexibility and playfulness that it has proven to give to me. But I never let go of my passion for science. I've just sort of redefined what it is I'm doing with science. And as I said, I think scientific method and the creative spirit of an artist are two of the greatest inventions of the human mind, and why we would not collaborate to use them as tools to our contemporary problems just seems like a huge mistake and a huge waste of resource. So that's what keeps me motivated, is to do that.
Fantastic. We are hitting exactly 1 o'clock. I want to thank you, Dario, for taking time to be with us, and looking forward to many other further conversations, interactions. And I want to thank the audience for having joined us. I apologize for not having been able to cover more questions, but I think you will be able to reach us if you want to know what we're doing and what our plans are. And again, thank you, Dario, and thank you to all the audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. See you later.